In the heart of the bustling African city, where markets roared with voices and children's laughter echoed, there lived a widow named Grace. Her small clay pot sat empty by the fire. Smoke rose from the hearth, but there was no food to cook. Her children's stomachs rumbled, their eyes wide with hunger. Grace looked at them, her chest heavy, whispering, "Tomorrow will be better, my children. God will provide." That night, Grace wrapped a torn scarf around her head and stepped into the dark streets. The moonlight revealed her weary face as she walked past glowing mansions where the smell of roasted meat filled the air. Her eyes stung with tears. She prayed silently, "Lord, let me find just a piece of bread." At last, she reached the grand gate of a wealthy man. The compound lights glared against her tired eyes. She knocked timidly, her voice trembling. "Please, sir, spare me something. My children are hungry." The gatekeeper scowled. "Go away, beggar," he barked. But Grace did not move. For hunger had made her bold, and desperation had made her strong. Grace's trembling knock echoed into the compound. The gatekeeper, with his chest puffed like a cock in the morning, sneered. "Woman, go before I call master. Beggars don't belong here." But Grace pressed her palms together. "Please, only food for my children." Her voice cracked, but he only spat on the ground, mocking her poverty. The gatekeeper shoved Grace away from the mansion gate. Her legs trembled, but she did not fight. She walked slowly into the night, clutching her empty stomach and whispering, "My children will sleep hungry again." The stars above seemed distant, their light mocking her pain. At dawn, shouts filled the mansion. Servants ran in panic, women wailed. Mr. Ade's lifeless body lay on the floor, covered hastily with a white cloth. Neighbors gathered outside the gate, whispering and crossing themselves. The news spread like wildfire. "The wealthy man is dead." Richard, his face pale but his voice firm, stepped forward before the crowd. "I saw someone near the compound last night," he announced. "A woman, yes, that widow Grace." The people gasped. Some nodded, recalling how she had begged at the gate. To them, it made sense. Hunger can drive even the weak to crime. Before Grace could even explain, guards stormed her little mud house. Her children clung to her, crying, "Mama, don't go." But the men pulled her away roughly. Her scarf slipped from her head as she cried out, "I am innocent. I only came for food." Yet no one listened. The crowd spat, calling her murderer. And from a distance, the homeless man clenched his fists, torn between fear and courage. He alone knew the truth. The city's courthouse was filled to the brim. Grace, the poor widow, was dragged in with iron shackles on her wrists. Her wrapper was torn, her hair messy, yet her dignity had not died. Her children's cries echoed from outside, but the guards silenced them. Grace lifted her eyes to the judge and whispered, "God sees me. He knows I am innocent." Richard stepped forward with confidence, his suit spotless, his words sharp as a knife. "Your Honor, this woman is no victim. She was seen at my late brother's house that very night. She came to beg, yes, but when hunger was not satisfied, she turned to greed and violence." The courtroom murmured. Some nodded in agreement, others shook their heads in pity. When asked to speak, Grace fell to her knees. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she cried, "I swear by heaven, I am innocent. I begged for food, but I never raised my hand to harm anyone. My children, they are all I live for. Would I make them orphans with my own hands?" The crowd burst into laughter, mocking her pain. Judge Okoro, an elderly man with gray hair and heavy eyes, sat high on his wooden chair. He watched Grace trembling in chains. His heart softened at her tears, yet the evidence stacked against her like stones. Witnesses whispered that they had seen her near the mansion. His gavel rested in his hand, heavy with justice and doubt. The courtroom boiled with noise. "Send her to prison," one man shouted. "She killed him for food," another spat. Children outside mimicked the chants, pointing at Grace's children as if they too carried shame. The widow bowed her head, sobbing quietly, while Richard smirked in triumph, certain of victory. Judge Okoro raised his gavel, his voice firm. "Grace, widow of the city, you stand accused of murder. With the evidence before me, I—" But just before the gavel struck, a voice thundered from the back of the hall. "Stop! Don't jail her. I was there that night." The courtroom froze. All eyes turned. And there, standing barefoot in torn clothes, was the homeless man. Gasps filled the air. Women covered their mouths, men hissed in disgust. The bailiff shouted, "Silence in court," but the crowd jeered. "Throw him out. He is mad." The ragged homeless man walked forward, barefoot, his clothes tattered, his beard unkempt. The stench of the streets clung to him, but his eyes glowed with unshakable fire. He lifted his trembling hands and spoke. I may be homeless, but my eyes are not blind. I saw what happened that night. His voice cracked, yet every word rang with truth. The judge leaned forward, curious. Grace raised her head, hope flickering in her eyes. Richard clenched his jaw, shifting nervously in his seat. The homeless man continued, pointing at Grace. Yes, she came to the gate. Yes, she begged for food. But she left with nothing, empty as she came. A hush fell over the court. He paused, then his voice deepened. The real killer was not her. It was the man who now points his finger at her. The crowd gasped as all eyes turned to Richard. The moment the words left the homeless man's lips, Richard leapt to his feet. Lies, he shouted, his voice shaking. This man is a lunatic. How can anyone trust the words of a beggar who sleeps in the gutter? The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Some nodded with Richard, others began to wonder. But the homeless man stood firm. Slowly, with trembling hands, he reached into his pocket. Gasps filled the room as he pulled out a blood-stained scarf. This, he declared, fell that night during the struggle. I saw Richard strike his brother. I was too afraid to speak, until today. But the truth cannot remain buried forever. He held the scarf high, its crimson stains glowing under the courtroom light. The judge motioned for the bailiff to collect the scarf. When it was compared, every eye widened. The cloth matched the very suit Richard wore on the night of the murder. Grace clasped her hands in disbelief, whispering, God, you have remembered me. Meanwhile, Richard's face turned pale as chalk, sweat dripping from his forehead. For the first time, fear gripped the accuser. Judge Okoro rose to his feet, holding the stained scarf in his hand. His voice thundered across the hall. Richard, you stand accused not as a witness, but as a murderer. Do you deny this evidence? The courtroom fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Richard staggered forward, sweat soaking his fine suit. It's a trick. That beggar planted it. He wants to ruin me, he screamed, pointing at the homeless man. But his words rang hollow. The people had seen the fear in his eyes, the trembling in his hands. Whisper after whisper spread through the hall. Could it be true? Did he kill his own brother? Grace lifted her head from the floor, tears shining in her eyes. The same crowd that mocked her now shifted their gaze, their anger turning toward Richard. The homeless man stood firm, his ragged clothes swaying, but his voice steady. I saw the truth, and today I will not be silent. The mighty had begun to fall, and the forgotten were rising. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. Guards! Seize him, he ordered. 2 uniformed officers rushed forward. Richard tried to resist, thrashing wildly, but his strength crumbled. The same hands that once signed million-naira contracts were now twisted into iron chains. The courtroom erupted into gasps and shouts. Those who once bowed before Richard now spat in disgust. Shame, cried a woman. He killed his own blood, shouted a man. The rich businessman who had mocked Grace now stood pale and shaking, dragged through the very crowd he once commanded. Children pointed at him as he passed, just as they had mocked Grace's children before. The proud was humbled before all. The judge turned to Grace, his voice softer now. Grace, you are free. This court owes you an apology. Her chains were removed, and she fell to her knees, tears flooding her face. She lifted her hands to the sky. Thank you, Lord. You did not abandon me. And as she wept, the homeless man stepped forward and gently lifted her up. Grace, still trembling, felt a rough hand lifting her gently from the floor. She turned and saw the homeless man, barefoot, ragged, yet standing tall like a shield. His eyes glistened as he whispered, Mama, God sent me to save you. For the first time in days, Grace's lips curved into a faint smile. She fell at his feet, clutching his worn trousers, her tears soaking the dusty cloth. Stranger, you gave me back my life, and my children still have their mother. How can I ever repay you? The man shook his head. Do not thank me. Thank the one who sees the forgotten and fights for the poor. The crowd, once cruel and mocking, now stood in silence. Some wept. Others lowered their heads in shame. For in that courtroom it was clear. Truth had triumphed not through wealth or power, but through the courage of a man the world despised. And Grace, though poor, walked out richer than the richest, with freedom, dignity, and hope. As Grace stepped out of the courthouse, the bright sun bathed her face. The chains that once bound her were gone, and her steps felt lighter. Yet her heart pounded with longing. She needed to see her children. 2 little figures broke through the crowd. Her children, with tears streaming down their cheeks, ran toward her, their bare feet slapping the dusty ground. "Mama! Mama!" they cried. Grace dropped to her knees, opening her arms wide. They crashed into her embrace, holding her so tightly it felt as though they would never let go again. Grace kissed their foreheads over and over, her tears mingling with theirs. "My children, your mother is free. They tried to take me from you, but God has brought me back. Never again will we lose hope." The crowd that once mocked her now watched in silence. Some even wiped their eyes, touched by the strength of a mother's love. As Grace held her children, the people's eyes shifted to the homeless man. Only hours ago, they would have crossed the street to avoid him. But now whispers filled the air. He saved her life. If not for him, an innocent woman would be lost. The very same market women who once threw stones at beggars now stepped forward. One laid a wrapper across his shoulders to shield him from the sun. Another pressed a loaf of bread into his hands. A child tugged at his torn sleeve and said softly, "Uncle, you are brave." For the first time in years, he was not treated as dirt, but as a man of worth. Grace stood tall, her children by her side, and pointed to him. "This man, whom you call homeless, is the reason I am alive. He is proof that God can use even the forgotten to shame the proud." The crowd erupted in applause, their cheers echoing through the city square. The man bowed his head, tears of quiet joy streaming down his weathered face. By evening, the tale of the widow and the homeless man had flown across the city like wildfire. From crowded markets to quiet courtyards, people whispered, "Did you hear? A rich man tried to frame a widow, but God sent a beggar to save her." The city buzzed with wonder, each retelling heavier with lessons. Many who once mocked the poor now lowered their heads in shame. Wealthy men in fine agbatas asked themselves, what if truth had never been revealed? How many innocent voices have we silenced with our power? Even children learned a new song in the streets, singing, "Do not despise the weak, for God lifts them high." Grace, once scorned, was greeted warmly wherever she went. Women called her Mama Courage, while the homeless man, now honored, was given food and clothes. His new name spread among the people, the witness of truth. And slowly, hearts began to change. The city had been taught that justice does not wear silk, and truth does not always live in mansions. Days later, Grace sat before her small mud house, but this time her pot was not empty. Neighbors brought yam, rice, and firewood to support her. Her children laughed as they ate warm food, their bellies full for the first time in many days. Grace watched them with tears of joy, whispering, "The Lord who delivered me will never forsake us again." The city elders summoned the homeless man. Instead of scorn, they gave him clothes, a small room to live in, and work at the community hall. For the first time in years, he slept on a bed and woke without hunger gnawing at his belly. Yet he remained humble, always saying, "I am only a servant of the truth." Grace and the homeless man became like family. She often said to her children, "Never look down on anyone, for the one you despise today may be your savior tomorrow." And whenever the man passed by, the children ran to hug him, calling him Uncle. Together, they showed the city that kindness and truth can rebuild even the most broken lives. Weeks later, the town square was filled again, not for judgment, but for thanksgiving. Grace, her children, and the once homeless man stood before the people. Drummers beat softly, and women ululated in joy. The judge himself attended, his head bowed in humility, ready to speak of justice and truth. Grace stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. "I was a widow with nothing. I was mocked, accused, and nearly destroyed. But God used a man the world despised to save me. Learn this lesson. Never despise the poor, never silence the weak, for truth does not choose status." Her words sank deep into every heart. Even children stopped fidgeting and listened. The homeless man, now clothed in clean garments, raised his hands. "Wealth fades, power fails, but justice will always rise. If I, a man with nothing, could stand for truth, then anyone can." The crowd erupted with cheers. From that day, his name lived on in the city's memory as the witness of truth, and Grace's story was told for generations. And so, the widow walked free, the forgotten man was honored, and the proud were humbled, a lesson carved forever into the soul of the people. If you had been in that courtroom, would you have believed the ragged man's words, or would you have laughed with the crowd? Think carefully, because how you treat the weakest today may decide who stands for you tomorrow. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this message. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and what act of kindness inspired you today. Thanks for being part of this journey. Until next time, remember, even the smallest act of kindness can change a life.